Hello, and welcome to What is Innovation, the podcast that explores the reality of a word in danger of losing its meaning altogether. I'm your host, Jared Simmons, and I'm thrilled to be joined by Hunter Hastings. Hunter is an economist turned corporate marketer, having served in various roles such as CEO, CMO, and senior partner. He's advised Fortune 500 clients on customer motivation and service strategy, and is the co-author or author of 7 books on business and economics. Hunter, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm so excited for this conversation.
Well, thank you, Jared, for the invitation. It's an honor to be here. I've been listening for some time to your shows, and I really enjoy your guests and your questions and what we all learn from those discussions. So thank you.
I appreciate that. That means a lot. Let's dive in, shall we?
Please.
What, to your mind, is innovation?
Well, Jared, I'm going to give you the economist's answer, which I think is the best way to look at it. Innovation is the creation of new value, new economic value specifically, for an end user with a viable business proposition. So if you break that down, firstly, it's important to understand value. And value in the economist's viewpoint is subjective. It's all in the mind of the customer.
Right.
Value is what the customer says it is. And as subjective, it's much more of a feeling, it's emotional, it's intangible, it's not highly measurable. If we say, can we measure value creation, it's a really hard thing to do.
It is.
That's the first part that innovators have to think about is value from the customer's standpoint. And then the other parts of the definition include end users. You've got to have somebody who's using the innovation to improve their world, improve their lives. And the business model means that it's sustainable, that those end users will pay for the innovation that you're introducing. They'll pay enough that it's greater than your costs.
Right.
An economist would say, you make a profit, you could reinvest that in further innovation or improvement, but you've got to have a viable business model. Otherwise, it's not an innovation. It can't sustain.
Sustainability, I shouldn't say sustainability because that form of that word has its own kind of connotation now.
Mm-hmm.
But the ability to sustain something and innovation don't often show up in the same sentence. I think a lot of times people think of innovation as think about the front end of it, the new part, and not necessarily the can it be sustained portion of it. What's the difference between the new not sustainable and the new sustainable that makes it innovation?
The innovation has to fit into a system, I think, Jared. It's got to fit in and contribute something new. The system goes on and on. It's evolving. There are new emergent patterns come from it, but the system continues. So you've got to fit into the system and contribute. The way we think about the customer is they're on a value learning cycle. So you start with a value proposition that's new. But the customer is looking at that and saying, is there anything in this for me? And there may or may not be. We call that predictive value. If you get through that step, they then look at relative value. Relative to everything else I could do with my time and my money, is this likely to be better for me? So that's relative value. Then comes exchange value. Will I pay for it? How much will I pay for it?
Yes. We are all familiar with that.
That's the business model step.
Yep.
Then there's the usage experience. And we use the word experience because you use the device, the new thing, but you're doing something that you want to do. You're cleaning the house. You're running your company. You're in that system. So you get that experience of using the innovation in the system. And then you assess it at the end. And at the end of that cycle, everything's changed, right? The new innovations from other people, your life has changed, you've had kids, your business has grown, whatever it might be. And so you get back in that cycle. What's the next thing? And so to be sustainable means that you fit into that cycle, but constantly changing, constantly updating, constantly improving. Otherwise, you don't sustain. You drop out of the cycle. We think of that as value learning. And what the innovator is doing is saying, here's what you can want. It's something new. And then the customer looks at it and say, well, do I want that? Do I want to learn to want that? So the cycle is what is sustainable. That's the way an economist would look at it.
That makes a lot of sense. It's quite an elegant system. You can overlay that onto any type of system or process or service or product.
Mm-hmm.
You can take that into government services, providing service. Anywhere that someone is providing value to someone else, you can apply this model. And I think it's important to call that out because so often innovation gets pigeonholed into a technology discussion.
Mm-hmm.
But nothing about what you just laid out has any inherent relevance to technology in and of itself.
Well, everything can fit in.
Right.
So technology, as you rightly say, has to fit into that learning cycle.
Mm-hmm.
One of the questions you often ask your guests is, how has innovation affected the guest's career?
Yeah.
I was back in Silicon Valley in the late 1990s and the early 2000s.
That's an amazing time to be there.
Yeah, it's a long time ago, but yeah, it was real hotbed of technology and innovation because we're just figuring out the internet and just figuring out the applications of technology. And we had a technology called digital asset management, which was cutting edge back then. The idea that you could put photographs and drawings and audio files and videos on the internet and store it and manipulate it. That was a big idea back then.
Yes, it was.
It's perfectly normal back now. But the technology wasn't of value until we found an end user and helped them to have a better experience. And the end user we chose, there could have been many, but was the advertising and marketing world. So the people making television commercials and print commercials and things like that.
Right.
If they could use digital asset management to do a better job of managing their assets, using their assets, making better commercials, distributing them better, and so on, that became a value. That's a good example. The technology was great.
Right.
And technology is always going to evolve. It's always going to get better. But you've got to find the usage. You've got to find the end user and the value experience that technology brings.
That makes a lot of sense. I grew up in the consumer packaged goods world. So my early career was at Procter & Gamble, and I worked at Coca-Cola for a little while. And so when I think of technology and innovation, they are usually fairly distinct for me. And I think in the last 5 to 10 years, there's been almost a synonymizing of advancing in technology and innovation in terms of that's what innovation is. AI is innovation. EVs are innovation.
Mm-hmm.
Introducing these new technologies, these new ways of solving problems. And so that example of digital asset management is a technology. It became an innovation once we found the end user and defined what the exchange value that drove a positive user experience ended up being. That's such an important, I think, point to make today in the way the world is moving, because the digital asset management was the enabler. It was not the innovation.
Right. Exactly. So you and I graduated from the same place. I was at Procter & Gamble, mostly in the UK.
Yeah.
P&G is actually a brilliant example of what you're talking about. I was in the detergent business.
Mm-hmm.
We were washing clothes.
Yes.
So my end user was mom. And my job was to understand mom as deeply as I possibly could, understood what she thought was important, things that mattered to her. And we encapsulated that in things like whiteness and brightness and cleanliness and so on like that.
Yes.
But what really mattered to her was that when her kids went to school or her husband went to the office, she was proud of the fact that they were well turned out, their clothes were clean, they smelled good, they looked good. There was a kind of pride. That's what we were trying to achieve. Now, you achieve that through chemistry, right?
Right.
We invented all kinds of new chemical formulations that work better in different washing machines and different water temperatures and so on.
Yes.
But pride was the benefit at the end of it. And that's what innovation does. I can make mom feel prouder of her kids because the colors are brighter or the colors are clean when he goes to the office and so on.
Yes.
That's a great example. I love that one.
Yeah. We were probably helping the same folks solve problems.
Mm-hmm.
I was in baby care.
Yeah.
So if our product didn't work, then your product had to fix it.
That's right.
Yeah, it is a wonderful place to be from in terms of understanding the difference between technology and innovation, understanding the difference between a consumer and an end user. A lot of things that get conflated And we talked a bit before we started recording, we talked a bit about language and the role of language in our current society's approach to problem solving. And I think that's another good example of how that comes to light, is the need to have new words for new concepts.
Yeah, it's a real challenge today. When we were talking at the outset, we talked a little bit about management and how you manage innovation. And that's a real challenge. As I mentioned, I've just completed publishing a book with Cambridge University Press. And it's about the invention of the corporation, which was a super innovation at the time, Jared. The second half of the 19th century, the population is growing, technology is bringing you railways and steam engines and factories and so on. It needed the corporation because the economic structure prior to that couldn't achieve the scope and the scale that was required as population is growing. They're moving west, they're building homesteads, they're building new cities. And the corporation, because it could attract much greater investment, was able to build those factories, do the mass production, do the mass marketing, do the mass distribution that had never happened before. The way I always like to tell it, people talk about John D. Rockefeller and Standard Oil.
Right.
And he was supposed to be a robber baron. What he did was he brought affordable illumination to all of those people, that they could illuminate their houses at an affordable price.
Wow.
Candles were for the rich people. They couldn't be afforded everywhere. And that meant they could be more productive. They spend more time with their kids in the evening, or they could work in the barn, or whatever was required to extend the hours of the day. And the cost of kerosene went down, I can't remember the numbers, but 1,000%.
Wow.
That was an innovation of itself, made possible by the corporation and the scale and scope.
Right.
So innovation comes at us from a lot of different places. What happened was that we introduced management into the corporations, and management tends to be, let's keep things as they are. Let's stay smooth. Let's be predictable. We've got to hit those quarterly earnings. So you're right to say that's a little bit of a curb on innovation. So we've got to figure out in the 21st century how we innovate. A lot of it's through startups and entrepreneurship, but we've got to innovate in the big corporations too. And that's a challenge, I think.
I think it is. And that is a fascinating sort of exposition around the corporation and sort of what it enabled in that era. And I think it's important to highlight some of the, like you said, the scale and the scope that came out of the corporation that couldn't have come out of previous business structures. Because before it was essentially, you tell me, but I think before it was essentially, I own a store. If I have $5, I can buy $5 worth of goods and sell them for $6 and then take that dollar and go buy some more goods and then hopefully build up over time. But there wasn't this sort of way to accumulate and disseminate capital at scale in an efficient manner. Is that fair?
That's exactly right, Jared. There were partnerships. And so in the book, we call it Aberrant Capitalism because we're highlighting what used to be capitalism. We think maybe it's faded a little bit, but there were partnerships. We feature one from the UK that your listeners may have heard of. It was called Wedgwood Pottery.
Oh.
Wedgwood was a great innovator, invented new and better ways to make pottery. He distributed to more and more people. He invented glazes and coloring and different forms. They had a fancy new thing called a teacup, which you could drink the fancy new beverage tea from. So he was a great innovator, but it wouldn't scale because of the structure. You couldn't attract the capital, as you said, to the partnership. But to the corporation, you could. So limited liability meant that you could collect lots of investment from lots of people, and their liability was limited to just what they put into the corporation. They weren't taken to bankruptcy court. It should be in the prior model and so on. So it was legal innovation as well.
Right.
But scale and scope, as you rightly say, only came with a corporation. And then you built the railways and the factories and the great distribution systems and the oil companies and so on. Couldn't have been done before.
Right. And so what I'm hearing as you're describing this now, I'm hearing parallels to our current conversations around AI and GPTs and things like that, where I think there's this demonization of corporations as stifling innovation, centralizing wealth, doing other anti-competitive things. But it's not a corporation structure that does that. It's human beings that do that.
Mm-hmm.
The structure of a corporation inherently is not wrong or monopolistic or anti-competitive, is what I'm hearing from you. And I think there's probably a parallel conversation to be had around some of the modern technologies and structures and ways of organizing and thinking about problems. They're not inherently good or bad. People bring intent to them. They're just tools.
Right. That's exactly right. I think you've hit the nail on the head, Jared. We call that problem management. But the great corporations, I think, are able to be ambidextrous. They can do both. They can do the creative innovation and they can manage what's out in the world already.
Right.
And that comes from systems theory. In systems theory, they call it explore and exploit.
Yeah.
So exploration is the creative looking for new ideas, just with no boundaries, no barriers. Management might call that failure. You keep trying and it doesn't work, but it's not. It's exploration. And then when you find one that attracts an end user, is sustainable, it's got a business model, it fits the cycle, then you exploit it. Now, that's a nasty word, but it's the way that systems sciences talk about, which is keep doing it, keep making it better, keep making it more efficient.
Right.
And so if a corporation can be ambidextrous, can both explore and exploit, then I think we can get to the solution that we want. It's when management exerts too much control and doesn't like the exploration part because it's not predictive, it's not linear, it's not something they can make rules for in a bureaucracy. That's the difficulty. So I think corporations can do both. Not all of them do.
Right. It's a strategic decision in a lot of cases.
Yeah. As you would say, it's a mindset, right? It's a culture.
Right. Yeah, exactly. What do you think the future looks like for innovative corporations? I can't imagine that even if you want to be innovative as a corporation, I can't imagine you can still go about it the way people went about it 170 years ago.
Yeah, we talked about the business model, Jared.
Mm-hmm.
There's a fabulous new business model that we're just learning about, and that's the direct connection to the end user, to the customer or the consumer. So think of Amazon and think of the Google search bar and think of those things. It's really the first time we've had that direct connection. In the digital world, that can proceed through that cycle very quickly. So you put up a new item on Amazon, it's clicked on or it's not clicked on, you find out what works and what doesn't, you recycle that. So taken at scale, we call that digital enablement. So even in B2B, you're dealing with your end customer, you're getting the signals back, the feedback loop, and you feed that into a data layer. You don't need people yet. Get the data layer. And then the AI and the machine learning and all of those processes can process that, look for patterns, make the adjustments, and go out with the new revised innovation or the new revised offering. So digitization can do all that. You can build the data layer, you can build the software. And if you ever read about what Elon Musk is doing at Tesla, he's eliminated most of middle management and he's got algorithmic management with real-time data, making allocation decisions all the time. I think we can get there. So then the human being part is what you excel at, which is the culture, the mindset, the getting everybody to agree on what the mission of the corporation is, getting aligned around that. So that human energy of making all of the functions in the company work in alignment. They're fed by the data layer. There are a lot of the decisions can be made by the data layer, but marketing still has a creative part to it. Customer engagement has a human understanding to it. Operations has a precision to it that can come from humans. So the human in the loop is still going to be important, but they've got to be doing different things in controlling and managing. They've got to be doing culture and humanism and ideation and those kinds of things.
That makes a lot of sense. And I think to me, what I'm hearing as you're describing it is not we need more people or fewer people. It's more like we need people doing different things and thinking in different ways and collaborating around different things. And to your point, I can go to Harvard and get an MBA and learn certain things about how business works, how it should be managed, how things should be structured, what financials should look like, and all those things. right now in 2024, there really isn't a place to go learn what are now currently called the softer skills that would be more critical to the culture building and the relationship management and the wiring of organizations for collaboration and cooperation versus top-down control. I don't know that there's a place to go learn that other than experience. And I think, extending your point, I think that is where the impetus for the new way of thinking would have to come from. There really isn't a place for it to bubble up from, to feed these organizations with new thinking from a management perspective.
You're so right, Jared. So innovation is starting to take place in business education. Let's put it in that bracket.
Yes.
It's not going to be the old MBA.
Yeah.
And the words give it away. Business administration. You're making the rules.
Exactly.
You're running the spreadsheets and so on.
Right.
It's going to come from what we talked about, understanding value. And then the key business skill becomes empathy. Being able to understand the customer and their system and what they want and what they need. So we've got some tools for that. We have a tool we call empathic diagnosis. It's like the doctor. The patient comes in with symptoms and the doctor diagnoses that and figures out what the right drug or surgery or whatever it is.
Right.
So business becomes empathic diagnosis. What does the customer need and how can I get it to them? Then there's got to be a design process, which I think is still got to be human because it's got to have that empathy baked into it.
Mm-hmm.
And then the feedback loop has to be human to human as well. So I think a number of people are trying to understand that kind of business education innovation. Myself and some colleagues are working on it a little bit.
That's wonderful.
But it won't look like a business school.
Mm-hmm.
And the second part of it, I think, is, and you said it, is experience. So as I learn these human values and empathy and so on, then I go do an apprenticeship or an internship in a corporation working on a project with real customers and real problems to solve and get to understand how I apply that new thinking in collaboration with new colleagues and new customers and so on like that.
Yes.
So that's another word that you pinpointed, Jared, is collaboration. That's so central to how we're going to create value in the future because only individuals experience value, but it takes collaboration and teams to deliver value to the marketplace. So that is critical.
Wow. Yeah, that is such an interesting distinction. I never really thought about it that way. Only individuals experience value, which it feels self-evident once you say it out loud. I love deep insights like that. That's such an important thing to wrap your head around because it changes the dynamics around stakeholder definition and stakeholder management and how you think about delivering value, not just in your business model, but within your organization.
Right.
So you can't just create a solution for women or a solution for people of color or a solution for engineers or a solution for middle managers because they each have their own definition of value. And so that empathy, that empathic diagnosis is probably as valuable and important in talent management, recruiting, retention, advancement, all of those things, as it is in how do we design and deliver value for our customers.
Right. Talent management has to become fitting people in culturally because their skills are going to get outmoded pretty quickly. And we're going to keep teaching them new skills, but how do they fit in? And there's an interesting area that's sometimes called team science, which is how do people on teams interact? How does that empathy work between team members? How do you make the teams most productive? How can they collaborate best? And there's some interesting studies around that. Because one of the things you try and do all the time is challenge existing knowledge. Right? That's innovation. So everybody comes into a team with some knowledge. They bring their knowledge to the table. You've got to challenge that. Do we know everything we should? Do we have to change it? That can be a little bit sensitive to people. And so how do you have that empathy in a team that is innovating? It's really interesting. But there's some good studies going on to improve that kind of team process. One of them is around the idea of flow. So instead of steps and processes and rules, how are you making value flow as fast and smoothly as you can? How can you remove obstacles to value? And so it's kind of a reverse engineering of fast flowing systems. So a lot of interesting stuff going on in that area.
Yeah. Oh, as a chemical engineer, flow is something that speaking my language and obstacles to flow and all the structural mindset shift that comes from thinking about a process in flow versus a batch process where we need 10 people, we bring 10 people and we sit them in this system and they sit there for 25 years and then they go out versus a flow of ideas, value, as you put it. There's so many different ways you think about evaluating, assessing, and describing value if you think about it in a state of flow versus a stagnant state. Yeah.
Right. You know from your engineering days that one of the things that can happen in flow is turbulence.
Turbulence, yes. Eddies.
And that was a really horrible problem to solve,
Yes,
right?
exactly.
We don't know how it starts. We don't know how to get rid of it. And that's the same in flow in business. You hit turbulence every once in a while, and you've got to figure out how to deal with that.
Yeah.
The analogy is a great one with engineering and biology especially.
It's quite apt. And I think the other fun thing about it is if you internalize it as a model, it depersonalizes some of the things that you're seeing. So it's not organizational conflict, it's turbulence. When you have turbulence in flow in a stream, you don't take all the water out. You understand what the dynamics are and you adjust the dynamics.
Yeah.
And so I think the corporate world, I think there's a lot of fire, replace, move out of this role, blow up the team, do this, do that, where it really just requires some system adjustments around the people. And it's so much easier to adjust the system than the people.
Yeah, so you don't blame the water for being turbulent.
Yes, exactly. That's right. That's it. That's exactly it. Yeah.
But what you said there, Jared, is really important about adjusting the system. We're just beginning to understand, I think, how systems are so interactive and interconnected and so many interactions going on, and you can't predict that outcome all the time. You certainly can't control for all the variables.
No.
You can't predict. You don't know what's going to happen. But you can place, I think you used to call them as engineers, constraints on the system. You can point it in a certain direction. You can stop it from, overflowing the banks, to use the river analogy.
Yeah, exactly.
So you can constrain it and see what happens. You can't control it. And again, that's a great advance in systems thinking, which is where a lot of innovation is coming from today, fitting into systems, as we said right at the beginning.
Exactly.
So you've got to understand systems and how they're all interconnected, and the systems within systems within systems. You've got to know all of those interfaces. Really fascinating.
It is. It is. I could talk about systems all day. What I love about where this conversation has evolved is a lot of times when people talk about innovation, it's talked about in the context of a brilliant one-off person having a lightning strike idea that suddenly comes to them fully formed, and they're the genius that kind of brings this to the world. And I think there are a lot of systems, there are a lot of processes, there are a lot of people involved in what ultimately gets labeled as innovative or an innovation.
Yeah, in systems theory, they call that emergence, Jared. New stuff emerges, didn't come out of nowhere.
Right.
It came from all of those prior interactions. I was thinking about the Wright brothers, who they invented heavier-than-air flight.
Love the Wright brothers.
Well, that didn't come out of nowhere. There were other people trying to think about that. Most of the scientists said it can't be done.
Right.
But the Wright brothers were thinking, well, birds fly and they're heavier than air, so there must be a solution somewhere.
Right.
And they broke it down into propulsion and lift and steering and those kinds of engineering elements, what an engineer does. And eventually it worked. So it emerged, but it didn't come from nowhere. It came from a lot of historical thinking that maybe hit some barriers, but they were able to think their way through it. So emergence rather than a flash out of the blue.
I love that, emergence. That's a great way of framing it. And the Wright brothers are one of my favorite innovation stories.
Yeah.
Their background, the way they went about solving problems, the help they received from their sisters, their father, the aviation community, such as it was at the time. Really is a fascinating story. David McCullough's biography of them is one of my favorite books on innovation.
Yeah, right.
It's an innovation story.
Absolutely.
It's been an amazing conversation. And before I let you go, I don't want to let you go without asking if you have any advice for innovators.
Well, I think the advice lies in two areas. I'm not highly qualified to give advice, but
disagree.
Based on what I've studied, one is this understanding value component, getting inside people's mental models and understanding how they think, which may not be rational. It's going to change from day to day. Just becoming, I call it engineers with empathy. You've got to be able to do both. You've got to be able to do the engineering, but you've got to be able to do the empathy. So cultivate your empathy. I would say that.
Right.
And then the other one is iteration. Iterate, because it's never right the first time, but it's not wrong. It's just one step, one effort, one iteration. And iterate collaboratively. We have lots of processes where you get people together. They've come up with a concept. You get another group to maybe critique that, which is just another form of iteration. Then you improve it. And you're happy about the iteration. You're getting better all the time. So I think embracing iteration, thinking that iteration is, it's what I'm doing. I'm getting better. I'm making progress, not I'm banging my head against a brick wall. So just keep iterating.
That is priceless advice and so succinct and reapplicable. That's what I love about the way you lay that out. Understand value, cultivate empathy, and iterate. That's really a fantastic blueprint to apply to anything you're trying to accomplish. It applies across so many different domains. Hunter, it's been such a treat to speak with you today. The systems thinking conversations and the conversations around value and the value learning cycle that stakeholders or customers and users go through. I just want to thank you for your time and appreciate you stopping by.
Good. Well, thank you, Jared. Thanks for the invitation. I love what you do. I've enjoyed the conversation as well. Happy to find that we've got a lot in common, and I hope we talk again.
Looking forward to it.
Thank you very much.
All right. Take care. Thanks so much for listening. Please subscribe on your favorite podcast platform to get more insights from innovators across the world. You can also subscribe to our YouTube channel for additional content and conversation. I hope to see you there. Until next time, keep innovating, whatever that means.